It's time for Drummer Nation.
Introducing the Star Festival snare drum from Gary Astrich, a handcrafted and precision replica of the rarest and most iconic of drums, Ringo Starr's 1963 Ludwig Jazz Festival. Each instrument is authorized and hand-signed by Ringo Starr and will benefit his charity, the Lotus Foundation.
These Regal Tip Session sticks feel great. They kind of put me in the mindset of a thinner and lighter 5A. Go to regaltip.com, order a pair, or go to your nearest music store. Pick up a pair and let us know exactly how you feel about the stick.
Hello everyone, my name is David Victor. I'm General Manager with the Craviato Drum Company. We wanted to offer a one-ply, solid shell product, but we wanted it to stay true to our mission of offering handmade drums of uncompromised quality built here in the USA. So take a listen to our Center Stage Series drum set.
Memphis Drum Shop is the world's premier provider of percussion instruments. With 6 showrooms of gear, mycymbal.com, the Memphis Gong Chamber, and a first-rate repair department, turn to Memphis Drum Shop for all your percussion needs. All right. With that, we're live. I don't really need these anymore. Wednesday at 1 o'clock. You know what that means? It's time for Drummer Nation Live. Today's topic is how to make a living as a drummer. It's getting harder and harder to do, but some of us have been doing it for a long, long time. Don't drool on yourself. That's the best thing you can do. All right. So I came upon a few articles. Thank you, Evan Stone, last week for helping me out with some of the precursor to this. I might have him back often. He's very perceptive and funny, and it helps me out a lot. So no show next week. I'm going on vacation. See if I can drink water without drooling again. Nothing to it, man. There's nothing to it. Going on vacation, so I'm not going to have a show next week, a live show. I'm about to post Tina Raymond's podcast show. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. You'll get a notice about that. Wherever you're watching, please like it, fan it, follow it, whatever it is you do. Subscribe, all those things. Wherever you find these things, they're all over the place. Please do that. Please do that. So I had a couple of articles I found. One was 7 ways most non-famous musicians make a living. I feel like Trump here holding it up. And another one was 18 ways musicians can make money. These are from the internet. You can look it up with all kinds of stuff. I don't know who these people are, or I would give them some more cred, but there's a lot of stuff on this. You can look it up. So as somebody who's made my living as a non-famous musician for a long time, I thought I'd go through some of these with everybody. The first one, it says, here are the ways most non-famous full-time musicians make a living. Playing in multiple bands so that they gig as much as 5 times a week, and playing those gigs in bands where they're paid at least $75 to $100 a gig rather than having to split beer money or play for free. This has been the main staple of most musicians. Let's face it, when you look online or you look in books about the music industry, it tells you how record labels are constructed, how to put a band out there in the marketplace, representation, legal, royalties, touring, merch, all those things really don't apply to most of us. Most cities are populated with musicians who are working professionals, who've been doing this all their lives, and there's a few things that we all end up doing here that I'll go over, but it's not generally record royalties, and it's not generally world tours. It's mostly working local clubs, local venues, local concerts, regional concerts. Depends on what part of the music industry you're in, but mine has always been a hired gun. Hired working gun is not so much being in a band. All right, so that's mostly what people do, I think. Number 2, it says playing at weddings and other gigs that come with a guarantee for the gig. I played 1 million weddings, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, testimonial dinners, divorces. I played a few divorce parties, house parties, all kinds of things like that. And a lot of places, those are bands that do that corporate bands, they're called these days, which is a band that plays a variety of rock and pop, funk and jazz tunes from the last 50 years. But a lot of it is just freelance, just hired gun stuff. In LA, we call them casuals. A lot of places call them club dates. That means it's not a rehearsed solid band. There's an unwritten rule out there that you run into in New York or Los Angeles, which is don't shake hands on the bandstand. Because they don't want the client to get the idea that you're not a band. And most of the things we do are not really a band. They're players who work in a coterie of other players who all know what's going on, and somebody calls tunes and it works just fine and nobody knows anything else. But otherwise, as far as the client goes. But isn't that a silly rule? Don't shake hands, because it could be your best friend and you just saw him yesterday. But that's where that rule comes from, if you've ever run into that. Teaching music is next. As many as 20 to 40 kids a week. Been there, done that. I've taught at a million music stores. My favorite one was Ken Stanton Music, owned by my friend Kenny Stanton, because he had a way of handling the books and the money and the students, and it was all a pro game, and everything was always square up and right, and I still appreciate him and his guys for that today. But generally speaking, you'll teach at a music store or some kind of music teaching studio, and that offers some kind of supposedly that offers some credibility. The parents have a waiting room. I recommend there's windows on the doors. We have the teaching studios. There's a store there to sell them the accoutrements they need, if it's drums and sticks and heads and things like that. And for that, the store takes a good chunk of the money, but not that much. Let's say it's a third. Anybody who's running their own business who says, "Hey man, for a third of your gross, I'll cover all your overhead, all of your expenses." Most business owners would say, "Where do I sign? Where do I sign?" So I've done a lot of that, and that's normal. Church music director is another one. I've never been a church music director. I've almost never worked for churches. A lot of people have good church gigs. It's like once a week on Sunday, and maybe they have a Wednesday something or a rehearsal during the week. Generally speaking, it's been my experience that they want you to be a parishioner or a congregation member and do that without being paid. But there are some great church gigs out there that pay pretty well, and a lot of my friends have done them. Just hasn't landed on my doorstep, though I have subbed on quite a few of them. Subbing, I just mentioned it. It's another thing. Drummers can only be one place on a Saturday night, and generally speaking, if you have something else or you want to get away, you want to take a vacation, you want to take a night off, you're sick, you've got a family commitment, or maybe you just want to do a different gig and get some other experience under your belt, subbing. Subbing is happens all the time, and you want to find qualified, capable subs who can come in and play the gig like a pro, have a good attitude, get along with the band, and not try to take your gig. So I've subbed for many a drummer, and many a drummers have subbed for me. The thing that's cool is when you move to a new city, the way I've always gotten rolling is to call drummers, because they're going to need that sub sooner or later. And it's a good way to get around and introduce yourself and meet people. Subbing wasn't on the list. Playing on cruises or in dinner theaters. I've done both. I did a lot of dinner theater work. I played, I don't want to name all the shows, but it's a Broadway kind of pit musical thing, and it's usually a scaled down version of a Broadway orchestra. It could be just a rhythm section with a piano. It could be something larger. I've done many shows like that, and cruises, I've played on cruises as a guest. I went to the Panama Canal with a good friend who's passed away now. Bob Masteller owns the Jazz Corner, or his family does now, in Hilton Head, and he called a friend of mine to play a great cruise gig, down 10 days into the Panama Canal as a guest, as an entertainer, not as a staff musician, run of the ship, passenger status, all that stuff. And I got it subbing. He said, well, anybody who my buddy here recommends is fine with me. Drove down and met him, Fort Lauderdale. Went out and did the gig, and I ended up working a lot for him and with him, and I miss him very much. Did one in the Mediterranean that was to die for. So I haven't done the theater. I mean, the cruise ship sign on for 6 months kind of thing as a crew member, but I have played on them, and it's fun. Played on a riverboat years ago with the Glenn Miller Band, and that was a great experience too. The next one says playing in a house band. These gigs are much harder to come by than in the past. Done that. Used to always seem to land a steady in Los Angeles with a jazzish, cocktailish, jazzish trio every year in January and February when the gigs slowed down. I would find a steady. Used to be you could find 5-night-a-week steadies. You could find 2-night-a-week steadies on the off nights. You'd work Tuesday through Saturday at a club, and then the same club or a different club would have a band. The relief band would be Sundays and Mondays. Bet on both sides of that. You have a steady that's on off nights or regular nights. Not a lot of those going on anymore. And the thing this article says is being wedding musicians tends not to be something musicians proudly announce. Now, when I moved to Los Angeles in 1980, it was right after the strike that they had lost, and everybody got knocked down a bit. So I would be on a wedding gig, and there'd be famous guys on the bandstand, and they'd be giving me their card. Here, let me give you my card. I'm going, no, I'm supposed to give you my card. You're the one I have on albums. But everybody got knocked down a few notches, so the studio guys were playing weddings, and the wedding guys, it just was a rough time there, and it got worse from there. But not a very prestigious gig. And the funny story I think of with that, it says the non-famous musicians I knew who were making the most money are viewed rather condescendingly by most music critics and up-and-coming musicians, thinking that's akin to selling your soul. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But I remember in Los Angeles, in a lot of towns, it used to be you'd work in a tux. And after the gig, you'd go hang out, you'd be in your tux, and that was like a badge of honor, man. I'm in my tux, I was working. In L.A., you'd say, hey, man, you want to stop off at the Baked Potato or something and hear such and such? And the guys would say, not like this. So when you're in your tux, yeah, but I don't want to be seen like that. I mean, these are session cats and heavy cats, and they're going to see that I'm working tux gigs. So it got to be something of a joke. The advantage of having a day job that pays the bills is you can also do music you love without being concerned about whether it pays the bills. Generally speaking, the more creative something is, the less likely it's going to be to pay the bills. If you're playing new music, original music, music of a different orientation, different instrumentation, interesting creative music, you're not going to be able to make as much, generally speaking, doing that until you hit a certain level as the guys who are out there playing parties and weddings and corporate events and all those things. Anyway, that's another option. Let's keep going through the list. That's this person's list. And we've touched upon a few more ways that weren't on the list. Here's another one. 18 ways to you can make money as a musician. If you're going to go full-time as a musician, you'll require some other source of music industry income. It tells you to diversify your revenue streams. Highly recommend that, but some of these are not really appropriate. Sell your music. Okay, digital distribution is a must. You must be accessible on all platforms. That's okay if you're in that position where you have a band and original music to sell. Sorry to bump the mic. But most of us don't have that, or they don't have it consistently. Talking about duplicating your CDs to sell. I don't even buy CDs anymore. Most people don't. But there is that if you're a CD guy. Sell merch, especially if you're a musician or band that is known for having a very loyal following. But it also says merchandise sales is one of the most unreliable ways to make money in the industry. It's very possible to end up selling no merch, even if you play a packed venue, and you might think about giving stuff away. This is what it says in how to make a living as a musician. CDs and merch tend to end up being ordered in bigger quantities to get the price break and sitting in boxes in garages till they're thrown away or given away. So be careful on those. Gigs, play live. the aforementioned. We've already talked about that. They're saying that that's really the only thing that the music industry can't totally screw up is we can go in and play gigs. And we get paid most of the money for playing the gig as opposed to some of these other ways. Create a website. It's a good idea to have a website which features some examples of your talent. I would think so these days. It's a calling card, and I have a paper on social media for artists. If you subscribe to our mailing list, you can get that paper, and it talks at length about that. Creating the website, I like the word create there. It's very expensive to hire somebody to write a website for you in code, and then every time you want to make a typo or something, change something little, you have to call your guy, your web monkey, and wait till that person has time to do it, and they're charging you by the hour, and on and on. Do it yourself. Wix, Squarespace, GoDaddy, there's a whole bunch of them. They're not that hard to do for what we need. I don't think a corporation should do that, but single musicians sure can. Pardon me. That's why I keep the bourbon here. Just water. YouTube channel. The beauty of using a YouTube channel as a platform is that it's free. You don't need to know anyone in the industry. You can try over and over again. Grab yourself a camera, some minimal lighting, mics, jump in. Start with basic, simple, primitive stuff you might just hold a phone up to. Try to get a little better at it. Teach music or an instrument. We've talked about this. You can generate revenue. I was teaching at one time 45 students a week, I think it was, half-hour lessons. That's 22 hours a week. A pretty good pay clip. So there is that. That's harder and harder to do. A lot of the people are going to Skype lessons. A lot of people aren't playing musical instruments anymore. A lot of the kids don't hear drums or guitar in popular music, and they're not interested. Or you get a lot of very, very young ones in music stores, special ed kids. If you prepared for that, that can still be a good way to make a living. Some of these, again, they're applying that I don't think apply to very many people. Record labels. I've never had a discussion with a record label in my life. And I'm 63 years old. I've been playing drums for 45 years probably. Streaming, they're telling you to put your own music up for streaming. A friend of mine just released his own album, and he's getting some notice on streaming. Not going to make much money there. Songwriting, composing, write songs for other musicians, compose music for film or television, earn royalties when the songs are performed. Again, that doesn't apply to most workaday musicians. Session work. Used to be. Solo artists need people in the studio to play various instruments on their recordings, and backup vocalists are also in demand. You could maybe end up in the band after you work for these guys. It sets up a network for you. This doesn't happen much, session work, because everybody's recording themselves at home. Years ago, if I wanted to do what this would be, maybe a cable access TV station, let's say, and there'd be a bunch of people here helping me do this. This is me. A lot of records are made that way. So there's not a lot of session work going on anymore. Licensing, so that's licensing your intellectual property, songs and music that you've created and own for people to put in movies and television and commercials and whatever. Again, that doesn't apply to most people. Composing music for theaters doesn't apply to most people. Schools, I wrote this in. Many school districts have an arts budget for bringing arts into the schools. I used to work, I was never in the band, but I subbed with them a lot. It was called the Atlanta Percussion Trio. And for 25 years or something, man, they were playing as many as 200 school dates a year through Young Audiences, a program that books those things, and then also on their own. And they were great. They would bring in hundreds of instruments and have play-alongs and parades and tie the curriculum into tie the presentations, the shows, into the curriculum. They could do one on science, on social studies, on math. You know how music can lend itself to that. And every culture in the world has percussion instruments. So they're not working as much as they used to. Some of that's dried up as well for funding for the arts for schools. But schools is another way you can go. Performing cafes, clubs, or malls. Funny how they put malls in there. You know, when I was in high school, our marching band played in the local mall, and what we found out right away is that the merchants hated it because they couldn't do business. You can't hear yourself think if you're trying to write somebody up for a sale and there's a freaking marching band outside your door, indoors in a mall. I have played like in Macy's, where you set up in front of the Panama Joe boxers or whatever they are with a tux, and you play music. It's usually in a weird spot and doesn't really, very little of that. Cafes, yes. Clubs, yes. And a lot of times, one thing you got to remember about these kind of settings is that it's background music, man. Nobody's coming to hear you, your background music. So it's not uncommon if people talk through the whole thing. It's not uncommon if the crowd noise is pretty loud. It's not uncommon if people are smoking cigars, if that's allowed, blowing smoke at you. They're not there to hear you. You may not be lit well. You may not have the right amplification or PA. But if you're going to work in bars, that can be the case many times. I mentioned last week my son was playing a solo guitar gig, chord melody stuff, outdoors at a restaurant, nice restaurant, good bread, good place, and they had him playing outside. And next door, a guy was mowing the lawn. the yard crew was there mowing the lawn. So, he worked it out with them, but they're not there to hear you. You got to remember that. The guy mowing the lawn has a job to do, too, that he's getting paid for. All right. Gigs at wedding or bars. Create sound files. I've actually done that. I have a couple of things out with F Expansion, some sound libraries from Stanton Moore's drums and cymbals from the Bosphorus days. And then we did a Peter Erskine pack called Virtually Erskine, which are his drums, the DW drums at the time, Zildjian cymbals, of course, and his grooves. And that's an extension that you can buy from the F Expansion website that plugs into BFD, the drum engine. Again, that's very unique, I don't think a lot of people are creating sound files for money, but some people are. Sell off old instruments. Well, that's more like a desperation ploy, if you ask me. But a friend of mine, John Emmerich, told me, he said, you have aging drum room syndrome. I said, what's that? He says, aging drummers who have more gear than they'll ever use again. But I don't really want to sell any of them. I have great stuff I bought over the years, but I used to use 3 kits in a day, do 300 gigs in a year. And they were at work everywhere, and I would even rent them out. And sooner or later, the day comes when you're not working that much anymore, and you don't want to. That's way too many gigs. But I do have, drummers end up with instruments for all kinds of things, different settings, different circumstances. If you play shows and you need a train whistle or a bongo or, you end up buying those things and hanging on to them. Or you might have multiple kits for multiple sounds. What I found is over the years, I was dialing in my sound and luckily getting paid to play sounding like me. And so I didn't have the need to have all these different types of drum sets. I ended up with a lot that are the same. Crowdfund your song or your concert. That's wearing kind of thin too. It says you can do one large one-time round of income maybe as long as you deliver what you promise. That's not a regulated field. People have been burned and ripped off. I don't know. The only thing I do crowdfunding in is Patreon. If you want to help me out here, you go to patreon.com, look up Drummer Nation, and you can pledge as little as $1 a week to help me out. And some people do, and I appreciate that. Number 18 on the list, DJs. DJs generally make money through bookings at clubs and bars. I don't know of any musicians who want to have anything much to do with being a DJ. It's kind of the antithesis of what we do. Though I do have a story on that. When I lived in Los Angeles, there was a company called You Should Be Dancing, and they sent out a DJ and an MC and a drummer, depending on the package the person bought. They called it Real Live. And you'd go on a gig, there'd be a DJ, you had to bring your phones and your extension cord, and you just played along with everything. And it made it seem live. And then they would hire comedians to be MCs. So I did a lot of work with them. It was unusual. You're playing by yourself with tracks. And my son and I did it. We had a little thing called Too Cool, where we took karaoke tracks and we left the vocals on. And we removed the drums and the guitar, and we played electronic instruments and did a bunch of gigs that way. It wasn't all that rewarding financially or certainly musically. And a lot of people didn't really get it. It's like, what are you guys doing? Isn't that how you practice? You play along with tracks? Well, it's one way. But here, take the sticks and try to play it. Anyway, we had some fun with it. That's about it. Okay, so I don't see any comments. You're welcome to comment here, of course. But most people watch this in post. However you put this package together to make a living, realize that you're probably going to be putting a package together of your various skills. Whether you could do web design, or maybe you shoot video, you know how to edit video, or maybe you're a social media person, or, there's nothing wrong with having just a regular day gig while you try to make your thing happen as a drummer. A lot of people have done that. No shame in that. That generally leads to jobs that you can make some decent money at without extended education, waiters, wherever that might be. Couriers, a lot of musicians end up being couriers. Something in the day because most of your gigs are at night. Substitute teaching. You don't need a degree for that. You're not really you're not really teaching. You're not allowed to teach. You're there to maintain order and, keep things moving forward. But most people will generally be doing a few other things. And one other thing about teaching in universities, I've talked to some great drummers who used to teach, and they said, well, I'll let that gig go. I was kind of busy. Then later they wish they hadn't because gigging isn't what it used to be. There aren't as many opportunities, so the people who end up with college teaching gigs tend to stay there for a long time. Okay, that's all I have on this. I think that covers the topic, and I hope that maybe we've touched on something that you think, hey, I could do that, make a little bread and contribute. One other thing, it used to be that you had, remember what a court musician was? Be a musician in service of a nobleman, something in a kingdom or a castle or something where you'd have on-staff musicians. I did a study once at the Ritz-Carlton in Atlanta as a staff musician for 10 years, man, and we felt like court musicians there. There was a trio, a jazz trio. On the weekends, we had a girl singer, and it's more like an R&B gig when the place was crowded and people were dancing. They had like a 10-piece corporate band, you would call it these days, cover band, with music, with a book. They had an orchestra. Sometimes would do like a 4th of July concert with 90 pieces on stage. They had a big band. There were ballrooms in the back that always had functions going on. I mean, we were working all the time as court musicians, you might call it. Maybe 10 different piano players on staff. That doesn't happen very often these days, and it's not happening there anymore either. But that's one, house musician somewhere. If you can find it, grab it. All right, I guess that's all I have. Look to see you next week. No, I'm not here next week. I'm on vacation. Before I go, let's hear from the rest of my sponsors, though. Sit tight, one more minute.
Our latest innovation has opened the door for all drummers to have the same access as top musicians in the world. Custom cymbals. Now available to everyone. Your next sound just got more interesting. Sabian Custom Shop.
Drummers seeking a quick and easy way to muffle bass drums on the fly, look no further. Muffbone offers an effective way to instantly dial in your sound in just a few seconds while seated at the kit. Find out more at muffbone.com.
Hi, this is Stanton Moore. I've been playing and teaching drums for over 30 years. My new site, Stanton Moore Drum Academy, is the perfect online drum learning platform for any level drummer to learn how to play the drums the same way I did. I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of you as subscribers on the site, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
All right, boy, that 30 minutes went very quickly, especially working by myself live like this. Just a few orders of business on the way out. Calls to action. This is what they call calls to action. One is if something you want me to cover, let me know. There's where you can write me. Get that newsletter. Sign up for the newsletter, and you'll get the white paper on social media for artists. I hope that can help you. You'll do it at drummernation.com. And if you want to go to Patreon, you can. Please give us something there. I have been working again as a drummer, and I had a gig Sunday. I appreciate everybody who came out. Some little stuff posted on my Facebook page. If you're interested in checking that out, there are a few more. If you're local, please do that. Okay, that's going to wrap it up for me for this week. No show next week, and we'll take it from there. Watch your newsletter in the email because the Tina Raymond interview will be going up in post-haste. All right, here's my sponsors, and on the way out, we'll hit the bumper and the bug and all that stuff. Talk to you soon. Thanks again. Bye.